Welcome to the Home Downsizing Show. My name is Ben Souchek, your host and the owner and founder of Home Downsizing Solutions. With the Home Downsizing Show, I want to provide you the information and resources to make the downsizing of your house stress and hassle-free. So sit back and enjoy the show. Thank you for joining us. Hello, this is Ben Souchek, and welcome to this week's edition of the Home Downsizing Show. Thank you for joining us today, and I know that you'll get some great content out of great information from today. Today, I have a special guest, Steve Schmidt with Burnett Wilson Law out of Omaha. And Steve, thank you for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. First, Steve, if you can, tell us who you are and what your primary area of practice is.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been an attorney for over 25 years, and the entire time I've worked with seniors. So I've done a lot of estate planning, and I've worked in elder law. Those two things have been kind of a primary focus for me. And so, yeah, as an estate planning attorney, I work with people of all ages. But a lot of times there's a big need when people are getting around retirement age or a little bit older to maybe review an estate plan, or maybe they've never done an estate plan. So I've worked with a lot of people that are seniors or approaching that threshold. And then a huge area of my practice over the last several years particularly, but I've been doing it for about 15 years, has to do with asset protection when somebody's concerned about long-term care, whether it's assisted living, nursing home, in-home care. That can get very expensive very quickly. And usually when I'm talking to people, it's a little bit smaller estates, a little bit more modest size estates. But I've been doing a lot of that type of planning for really good, hardworking people that just haven't been able to save $1 million. And so how do we make sure that they have good care as they need maybe assisted living or some other type of advanced care?
And you probably just hit the nail on the head here for my next question, but is that the primary way that you help people these days, is the asset protection, or is there another area that you say is kind of your number one area of help these days?
I would say it's asset protection. So with estate planning, we're protecting the family, we're protecting the client, their kids, but we're definitely protecting our assets too, just general protection. Whether it's from lawsuits or from the assisted living, or whether it's from just family issues. I mean, there's a lot of things that can creep up with blended families, and as we get older and just maybe have to deal with some different types of family issues. And of course, there's taxes and the government. There's all sorts of things that can threaten your assets, no matter how large or how small your estate is. So asset protection covers a lot of what I do. Whether it's from assisted living, the nursing home, or if it's just from the government and taxes.
Okay, very good. Is there one question along with that? Is there one question that you get asked more than anything else? Would that revolve around how do I protect my assets and keep what I have as well?
How do I protect my assets, and how do I know that I've got a good plan in place? The one thing that's kind of interesting in this area of law is we really don't know until maybe it's too late, so to speak. And so, people want to know, hey, I've got something in place, or I know I should be looking at this, but maybe it's been a couple of years since I've looked at it, or maybe my attorney's retired, or I haven't heard from my attorney in 5 or 10 years or more. How do I know if what I have is what I need? Okay. And is there an ideal time? I know that earlier is always better with this next question, but is there an ideal time for someone to start planning for downsizing or for the inevitable things that will typically occur in our lives? Sure. Yeah, so for asset protection from long-term care, the ideal time is when you can afford to buy long-term care insurance. We don't sell that, but we work with advisors to do. So maybe in your 40s and 50s is a good time to look at that. Now, even if you have long-term care insurance, and a lot of our clients that we work with don't have long-term care insurance, then the ideal time is at least 3 years before you go into assisted living. Well, who knows when that is? Maybe it's when you're 70, maybe it's when you're 80, maybe it's when you're younger. I've had some people as young as in their 50s go into long-term care. But usually when we're in 65, 70, 75, somewhere in there, if we think there's a good possibility that somebody could go into assisted living or need some type of long-term care, if we can catch them several years in advance, and again, 3 years is kind of the magic number. If we can catch them 3 years before they go into assisted living, we can do a lot to protect assets, and the process is so much better for the client and for us too. And that 3 years comes from, for Medicaid, there's a 5-year look back. And most of the time, we're talking about people wanting to go into a facility that requires private pay for maybe 2 to 3 years. And so if we can do the planning, wait 3 years, they go into assisted living, they private pay for 2 or 3 years. Now we've got some planning in place that's more than 5 years before we actually are looking at applying for Medicaid. So that's kind of the magic numbers. If we knew when you were going to go into assisted living, if you do, we do the planning 3 years before.
So that's kind of the ideal time frame for that. And again, the sooner the better. I'm sure that makes your job a lot easier, and you can advise people a lot better the sooner the better. But of course, people, I'm sure, typically wait until it's at an emergency stage, which my family's experiencing right now. But I'm sure you have a lot of fire drill experience too.
We do. We call it crisis planning. So pre-planning is when we're doing it 5 years in advance or 3 years in advance of assisted living. But yeah, we do a lot of crisis planning. So it's very common that somebody's mom or somebody's dad just went into rehab. They fell and broke a hip or something happened. And now the kids realize, or mom and dad realize, hey, it's not working to stay at home. So we call it crisis planning. And in Nebraska, fortunately, we can still do a lot to protect assets. It's a more challenging process. And now we're fighting sometimes with DHHS more than we would otherwise. But we can still preserve a lot of assets in Nebraska. It becomes a little tougher in Iowa, but we still do some planning in Iowa as well. So whether you're in Nebraska or Iowa or some other state, we can still certainly take a look at it. And like I said, Nebraska, we can save quite a few assets, even if mom just went into assisted living last week or last couple months.
Okay. And certainly we only have a little bit of time today to discuss asset protection and what you do to help people. Obviously, there's a lot of different tangents that we could go down, such as specifically for farmers. I believe you work with asset protection for farmers, as well as, would you say it's the most common thing for maybe a couple or individual that maybe their house is their last asset, and maybe they want to obviously protect the assets they have, but is that fairly common where a house and maybe a small retirement would be the most common person that you would deal with?
I would say definitely. So let's talk about the farmers just briefly. A lot of farmers want to make sure, hey, my farm is never going to go to the nursing home, to assisted living. So there we like to catch them at least 3 years or 5 years in advance on that. But yeah, we definitely want to do some good planning when we're talking with a farm couple. Yeah, I would say a lot of my clients, all they have is maybe a small life insurance policy, maybe a small IRA or retirement fund, and maybe their major asset might be their house. A lot of people I'm talking to, hey, the house is paid off, which is great. Sometimes it's not, but most of the time the house is paid off. But the house isn't worth like $1 million. The house is probably worth $100,000 or $200,000, $100,000 to something like that. But whatever the house is worth, sometimes that is the major asset. And so we're looking at, okay, what do we do now? How do we protect that asset as much as possible? And so that's where when we do some planning, we can't save every nickel, but we can still save maybe half of it. A lot of times, 60% or something like that, we can end up saving for the long term. So they can get some assistance and they can set aside a good chunk of money that's going to be there as long as they're alive. So whether they live another 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 years in assisted living or memory care, nursing home, we can still make sure there's some money that's not going to run out as long as they need it.
Okay. And I also assume with the asset protection, what you run into a lot of times is how to preserve those assets and potentially still get the care a person needs if they really, especially longer term, need or will probably end up on Medicaid or some type of assistance like that. Would that be accurate as well?
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. And I just want to throw in VA benefits. If you're a veteran, one of the things we always look at is aid and attendance, which is similar to Medicaid, but still very different. A lot of times we use either Medicaid or aid and attendance, but at least I want to at least put that out there that we do look at that. So yeah, how to preserve assets. There's a couple of key tools that we use. And it depends a lot whether it's a single individual, where one of them's going in, or maybe both of them are going into a community, or if it's a single individual. It can be a lot different depending upon those factors. But we do a lot with annuities, so it has to be a very special kind of annuity, and it has to work directly with the whole plan. So don't just go out and buy a Medicaid annuity from a financial advisor. You want to make sure that there's a clear plan and that the annuity works with that plan. And then we do a lot with irrevocable trusts. And I know people get a little nervous or a lot nervous when they hear that term irrevocable. So I just want to assure you that the irrevocable trusts that we use are so much more flexible, and we can do so many things with them today that we couldn't do 30 and 40 years ago. So a lot of times people have heard about a trust, maybe their mom or dad died, and maybe their dad died, and then their mom had to go talk to the bank about this trust because, it was set up for federal estate taxes. And so there's a lot of things about irrevocable trust that probably were true 40 years ago, but today irrevocable trusts are just a great tool. We need to make sure we have a good trustee. A lot of times it's one of the kids. It's not the bank. A lot of times it's one of the kids. If we trust one of the kids or a couple of kids, that gives us tremendous flexibility and tremendous asset protection.
Okay. And you kind of touched on one thing that I'd like to follow up on. If you have a married couple, and maybe one of them, their health is degrading more, that they're going to need more attention soon, are there ways to not have to sell the family house just to try and get the right or the adequate care for one of the spouses?
Absolutely. So I'm working with a couple right now, really modest estate, and yeah, they may end up selling the house, not because they necessarily have to, but because the spouse that doesn't need the care yet wants a little bit better living environment, wants to move into a community where good meals and can hang and make some good friends and good relationships and good care. And so the monthly cost of living is going to jump up for her, but there's ways to make sure that her husband, who does need assisted living, can get what he needs and it can get paid for, and we can preserve as much as possible for her. So that's kind of the extreme, is where they don't have much at all. So we're going to actually try and get the husband on Medicaid fairly quickly. A lot of times, like I said, we want to go to a community where there is private pay for maybe a couple years, 2 to 3 years, something like that. But even if there is private pay for 2 to 3 years, and we don't have a lot of money, we can still do a lot to protect the spouse that's not going in. So we want to take care of both spouses, but in some ways, the spouse that's not going in is a little bit higher priority. They've probably been taking care of the other spouse. And also, there's a good chance they're going to live longer. We want them to maintain their independence as long as possible. So there's certain assets that are exempt. The spouse going in can go on Medicaid, and the spouse staying outside staying at home can keep the house, and they can keep the house indefinitely. So there's certain assets that are exempt, and then also the spouse staying at home can keep a certain amount of the community assets too. And it is possible that we can get the one going in on Medicaid quickly, and the spouse staying at home can keep everything. So sometimes that happens too.
And if maybe the adult children are trying to preserve that family house, I see this happen, I guess, in what I do every now and then, where maybe the adult kids don't care about the family house anymore, but maybe they do, and they want to preserve that. Are there common ways or ways so that the family can preserve that asset and get the parents they need, the care that they need also?
There are, yeah. So sometimes we have a child living with mom and dad in the house, and if they live there long enough, I think it's 2 years, but it's a couple years. If they live there long enough, we may be able to transfer that house to that child. That is a way to avoid losing a house. Another thing that we use on a regular basis, though, is a lot of times we end up putting the house into the irrevocable trust. We can still get good tax benefits and good advantages, but there are quite a few times where we put the house into the irrevocable trust. Maybe we sell it, maybe we don't. But once it's inside the trust, we're starting the clock ticking on getting that totally preserved from Medicaid. So again, there's a 5-year look back. Ideally, we can maybe put it in there 5 years in advance, but even if it's only 3 years or less, we can still get a lot of asset protection from using a trust. So yeah, there's different ways that we can protect that house, and a trust is certainly a good way to do that sometimes.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we've covered what I would think would be the primary questions that people would want to know. But is there anything else, Steve, that I haven't asked that would be beneficial for individuals that are considering downsizing, or whether they're just considering it, or especially if they need to at this point? Anything else you'd like to mention or information you'd like to pass along?
Well, we certainly have some resources, and don't hesitate to contact me, contact us. Burnett Wilson, we've got several attorneys that do this. I maybe have the most experience, but we have some others with a lot of experience too. So I can give you my direct phone number is 402-718-8781. My email is steve@burnettwilsonlaw.com. So yeah, if you want me to send you some information, or if you want to just talk briefly, almost always that first consultation, we sit down for maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half. That first consultation is going to be free, because we can get a really good idea of what needs to happen, and we can kind of explain it to you, and then you can decide whether or not it makes sense to go forward. So we're happy to provide information a couple of different ways like that.
Great. Okay. And you mentioned your phone number and email, and we will also put your contact information wherever a person may see or hear this interview. But again, Steve, thank you for joining us here on the Home Downsizing Show, and certainly encourage anybody that has follow-up questions for asset protection or anything that Steve can help you out with to contact him. And again, Steve, thank you for joining us today.
You bet. Thanks, Ben.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Home Downsizing Show. For additional information and resources on home downsizing, just go to homedownsizingblueprint.com. That's homedownsizingblueprint.com. Or if you're ready to sell your house and downsize, just go to homedownsizingsolutions.com. That's homedownsizingsolutions.com. And if you have ideas to improve our show, or topics that you'd like us to cover, or have any questions that we can answer, just call our office toll free 855 855-291-5005. That's 855-291-5005. Thank you.